good morning, good afternoon, depending what part of the world you're joining us today. Welcome to What's Privacy Got to Do with It, our community live stream called Cracking the Compliance Code. My name is Tahira. I'm the CEO of the TLC Group, and I'm joined by Lennox, Director of Accounting Services at Abacus. How are you today, Lennox?
I'm doing all right. Preparing for the holidays, so I'm excited.
Yes, Kate, those 12 months go so quickly. I feel like we were in this same position last year doing our, I think it was our 25 days of Christmas, wasn't it? That useful
Yes, it was
that
that.
people could do over the holiday season. But this year, we thought we'd start with sort of a look back of what people may have been doing for data protection and cybersecurity compliance for 2023 and giving you some useful tips for 2024. So we're really looking forward to today's presentation. Um, Thanks to everyone who's joining us. I could see we've got people coming from different platforms today. We've got our YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Privacy Pro community, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you. Thank you for coming and spending this time with us. So when we talk about compliance, I'm actually sorry, before we get started, it is the holiday season. I just wanted to say thank you to the TLC team who's worked so hard this year to help our clients and help the business to ensure that we're providing solutions that really help organizations and individuals. So thanks again to the TLC team for all your support this year and to our clients who have helped us to grow. Because again, with each client, we get new exposure to different risks, new ways and ideas of doing data protection in a holistic and effective way. So thanks again to our 2023 clients, and we hope to see some more of you in 2024.
Yeah, and I too would like to tag along on that and say thank you to our team here at Apcus as well for doing an amazing job throughout the year. And so much thanks to our clients who really make us who we are. And we're really looking forward to working with you in 2024.
Great, thanks. So yes, thanks to everyone who's involved with TLC and Abacus, that will have 2024 another successful year for both entities. So today we got a couple of topics we're really going to focus on. One is understanding where we are when it comes to compliance, because compliance is a local and a global issue. So we'll touch on some of the changes that have happened in 2023 and look forward at some of the changes that may be coming down the pipeline. We'll look at decoding and developing a compliance program that meets the code as well as gives you a roadmap to success. And then navigating some common compliance pitfalls. We've been helping organizations for several years now. We've seen a lot of the same situations happening over and over. So we've got some useful tips and ideas that may help you as you're navigating your compliance journey. And if you have a moment, feel free to drop in. Let us know where you're tuning in from, what part of the globe, because again, as we said, data privacy, security, data protection, it is an issue that affects all of us, regardless of what part of the world we're in. So let's get started with understanding the compliance landscape. First, we'll take a look at some of the regulatory frameworks that have changes that have occurred this year. Bermuda has finally announced that our Bermuda Personal Information Protection Act will be fully enforced from the 1st of January 2025. So to those who are tuning in from Bermuda-based organizations, you've got 12 months now. If you haven't already you started your journey, or if you started, but you just sort of, put it to the back burner, you now have 12 months to make sure that you're ready for all of the procedures and policies that you need to have in place for 2025. Jamaica has just recently, December 1st, their Data Protection Act is now fully enforced. So again, if you're in that jurisdiction, you want to make sure that you are looking at the legislation to ensure that you have compliance. Across the U.S., as you may or may not know, in the U.S., there is no sort of federal data privacy or protection legislation. So it's at a state level. So individual states have the responsibilities of creating their own regulations. So California has recently updated their California data protection legislation, Connecticut, Utah, Virginia. And then in 2024, 2025, Florida, Texas, all of these states are going to start having their legislation if you do business in some of those territories or those regions, you may want to have a look at what their state laws say, because even if you may be adhering to a local legislation, there may be some international exposure as well. And it's not just the new legislations that are becoming enforced. We also have legislations that are now having changes. I mentioned California, they've just updated. But also the EU, they now have their Artificial Intelligence Act, which is going to require organizations similar to GDPR to meet certain requirements with any data that's used in artificial intelligence systems, technologies, things like that. And then in the UK, there's the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. That is going to the House of Lords. Now, personally, I feel that this bill does water down somewhat the UK Data Protection Act. There's a lot more, it's giving a lot more flexibility and leeway to organizations when it comes to their data. So you may find that currently the UK has an adequacy decision with the EU regarding GDPR. There may be some discussions around that. So again, if you are working in any of those jurisdictions, it's important to keep your ear to the ground to see what's happening going forward. And then, I've talked about a couple of data privacy and security legislation, digital legislations that are changing and coming into focus for 2024. Lennox, can you talk to maybe how that can impact sort of on the auditing and statutory regulations that people may now have impacts because of these changes in legislations?
Sure. So, firstly, I want to mention, with all these different jurisdictions enacting their legislation soon, especially for companies who are doing cross-border training or offering cross-border services, I think is really important because not just to know your home legislation or your jurisdiction's legislation, but the legislations of these other jurisdictions because they might impact how you communicate information and how you share information in those areas. So going back now in regards to the initial question, in regards to the statutory audit, we all know for statutory audit, a lot of things are considered, including the going concern assumption that auditors always look for in order to sign off on those financial statements with a unqualified opinion. So legislation as important as this is definitely will be on the radar of auditors, statutory auditors, because non-adherence to such legislation can impact the going concern, or it can increase the amount of audit risk that is assessed by the auditors. So even though it is not a direct impact on, let's say, the financial statements or the information that is in the financial statements, the numbers in particular, it does have an impact on the going concern in the business and the audit risks and the amount of risk that the business is exposed to. So without saying anything too detailed, because I'm not currently in audit, but I'm pretty sure that audit firms as we speak are adjusting their programs to consider how they're going to manage audits with this additional risk coming on board in regards to non-compliance to the Privacy Acts.
Yes, definitely. So when we talk about regulations, compliance, you sort of have to have that holistic view and look at it not just sort of in a silo. Think about how it can impact other functions and operations within the organization. Today's environment is very complex, wouldn't you say, Lennox, when it comes to just day-to-day operations? We've got challenges with maybe staffing, challenges with resources. Throwing compliance into the mix is also a way that can increase sometimes some of the stress and burden on organizations. And there are a couple of sort of compliance challenges that we just want to bring to light so that you're prepared if your organization does encounter them. Those are burnout, getting buy-in across the organization. So that includes from the top management all the way to the bottom. So any of those administrative staff, people that may be handling the data on a more of a day-to-day basis, making sure that they're bought in, timing and resourcing we'll talk to in a moment, having adequate oversight. I've seen so many times where we've come in, we've helped an organization, we've put in a program, and then sort of we go out the door, and then it's left there. So making sure that you've got someone who's going to keep on top of your program, and having that sort of knowledge sharing to ensure that just because one person isn't there, that you still have people around that can fill the gap, and help make sure that the compliance program is still being adhered to. And then identifying and mitigating risks. Every day there is a risk in an organization, right? From the moment someone steps into the building to a computer is turned on, till we've had conversations with customers. They all have risk exposure. And we'll talk in a moment, just briefly, about how you can help overcome some of those challenges. But one of the ones, the timing and resourcing, Lennox, did you just want to maybe talk to a little bit more about, because again, when we talk about compliance, some of the same behaviors or activities take place across any type of compliance activity, not just data protection. So do you want to just maybe elaborate a little bit more about the challenges sometimes with timing and resourcing, and maybe give our listeners a couple of tips on how they can overcome that?
Right. In regards to the terminal resourcing, it all seems like additional work. Having having to put in policies that would allow you to comply with the act and not be um, non-adherent. But in regards to operational wise, it doesn't have to be. One of these things I find a lot of organizations are seeking to do is to use its existing resources to cover the compliance to the standards, to the different legislation. And by using your existing resources, you can, and we're going to probably talk a little bit more about this, incorporate it more into the operations rather than seeing it as an additional task or an additional job. Is incorporated into your existing roles, into your existing jobs, and that can make it seem pretty much seamless. Just to give an example for us, I spoke about this earlier about having a practice management program, which we use to manage our practice. And rather than seeing it as an additional task we have to do every day, we've actually incorporated that into our operation, that we live in that space. Each morning, our emails are in that space. All of our communication tools are in that space. So each morning we come in, that is where we go, instead of having to go to different places, having to go to Outlook or having to go to a separate task management program. There's everything in there. So incorporating it into your operation would be the best practice going forward to make it an efficient process.
Thanks. So, what I'm getting from what you just said, Lennox, and is what, again, we'll elaborate a little bit further, is definitely when you're looking at compliance, it should be part of the day-to-day business, right? It shouldn't be just something that's, in and, think of something over there. It should be considered part of your everyday normal business processes. The other thing I just wanted to highlight again is one of the key compliance challenges that I see quite regularly, is in identifying and addressing those risks. So when we think about risks, there's sort of four main areas it goes across. You've got administrative, technical, physical, and operational. Those are the four key areas we normally look at when we look at risk in an organization. And you may find that your organization, you go through, you do your risk assessments, and then it sits in a folder somewhere on someone's desk, or buried in an email, or on a company intranet or shared folder. But the addressing doesn't take place. And that's where I find some organizations really struggle is, okay, yeah, we know what our risks are, but now how do we actually go and address them? I always call it the approach of, eating the elephant one bite at a time. Prioritizing, it can be overwhelming. And we sometimes do risk assessments. We may have organizations that have 30, 40 risks that are identified. how do they go and address them all at once? We believe in prioritizing, looking at your high risk, high impact risks, addressing those first. Possibly building it, delegating and building a team so that you may have some people that are just sort of doing those low hanging fruit type risks. They don't have high impact, but there are a lot of them. And then maybe focusing some more of your expertise towards those risks which really have high impact and high risk to an organization. So one of the key challenges as you go through your journey is to continuously assess your risks and making sure you're putting in place a plan to address them. Anything you wanted to add there, Lennox?
Yeah, and it's all about spending time where the risk is higher. The higher risk, the more attention you give to a
Mhm.
particular area, and that is actually similar to how audits are conducted as well. You'll find that at the beginning of the audit, when a risk assessment is done, there might be some areas in terms of producing the financial numbers that are at higher risk.
Mhm.
Let's just say that you're working in a business that is heavily cash. There's a lot of cash passing through the business, and the risks of cash being misstated then might be higher because you have so much cash passing through. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. So the audit team would assess that area as high risk, and obviously the procedures would be designed around spending more time determining that the final balance of cash is fair, is a fair representation of what it actually is. Tahir made a great point just in regards to continuously assessing risk, because things can change as well. Because one area is a high risk at the beginning doesn't mean it's going to be continue. It's going to continue like that. And on the opposing end, because the area is a low risk initially, it doesn't mean it's going to always be a low risk. So it has to be a continuous risk assessment process that is taking place.
Yeah, great. That's especially in, I guess, how dynamic the environment's changing, right? The workplace environment. There's a lot of talk about using artificial intelligence, machine learning tools, emerging technologies, biometrics in organizations as a means of identifying people. So if your organization is looking at that, remember anything biometric. And those are things like, fingerprints, eye scans, voice detection. Those are all things which have requirements under pretty much every legislation to have additional safeguards. So it's not just, again, being static and saying, okay, we did our risk assessment January 1st, we were pretty much compliant, and then we can just walk away from it. It is a process of regularly reviewing that, reviewing when new tools, when new staffing changes, to see is there any additional exposure or any new risks that have entered the organization. We can't go any further without discussing some of the impacts of non-compliance. And those of you who have been faithful, what's privacy got to do with it, listeners, you will have heard us mention this regularly. There are real impacts of non-compliance. There's financial impacts, reputational, legal, operational. I'll let Lennox talk in a moment about some of the, what a financial impact could have on an organization. But the operational side, in a lot of the legislations, it does allow for the statutory authority or the commissioner, the privacy commissioner, information commissioner in the jurisdiction to put a sanction against an organization if there is a real high risk in how they're processing information and they don't have adequate safeguards. That supervisory or statutory authority can actually stop an organization. It can put in place a sanction, a notice, and say, we do not allow you to continue using or processing this information. And that can have real operational impacts. So we sometimes think, oh, well, we'll just, we've got insurance, we'll throw some money at it. Reputational, we've got our media team, they'll go out and make it seem all fine and dandy. And we've got some great lawyers on retainer, on standby. But I think the operational side, and we've started to see this a bit more in some of the more mature jurisdictions, which the legislation has been around and enforced for a number of years, you will now start to see more of these types of sanctions where organizations, unless they do what the supervisory authority has asked them to do to mitigate those risks, they are getting these notices that they have to stop using the data. So just think about what that impact could have on your organization that couldn't be helped, or you couldn't outsource that type of risk to another entity. So Lennox, did you want to just touch on what a financial sanction or financial fine, what impact that can have to an organization?
Yes. So there are going to be two types of financial impacts that a non-compliance will have. There's going to be a direct financial impact, and then there's going to be indirect financial impacts that down the line turn into direct. So everything that Tia just said basically is can have a indirect financial impact. For example, reputational risk damage would result in less customers coming, less clients coming to you, which will have a financial impact down the road. Or in terms of companies that are traded, in terms of attracting investors. Investors might not want to be associated with you or a company that's non-compliant, which will have a financial impact. And then there's the direct financial impact, the payment of penalties and fines, which in some cases can be significant. And for small businesses, especially, it can actually mean the end of the business. I mean, if a business has to pay hundreds, tens of thousands of dollars in fines for a business that only makes minimum profits throughout the year, that could mean closing shop and walking away. So, I mean, it can vary in terms of the level of penalty there is compared to the type of business, the size of business, but it can go to either extreme. It can mean the close of business, or it can mean a significant reduction in your profit for a particular fiscal year.
Yeah. And I think, so the GDPR, the EU GDPR, they do it on a percentage, 2%, 4% at the higher level of a breach. Whereas other jurisdictions, they have a specific amount. So, it could be 20,000, 25,000, 100,000, depending on the jurisdiction. Regardless, who wants to pay that fine? Right? That fine could go into, releasing new products, giving your staff additional bonuses and things like that. So it really is, it's not just a data protection issue. I think it's a sustainability and corporate governance issue, right? It's important that and that's why we talk about that, but we mentioned the buy-in at the beginning. Management needs to understand it's their responsibility, their governance, especially if there's a board of directors or C-suites who really the buck stops there, to ensure that they are adequately resourcing the compliance program. Because at the end of the day, as Lennox said, who wants to go out of business because you've just mishandled people's personal data, right? And there are so many different ways at different levels that you can put in place a good program, even if you don't have a huge budget to do so. So there is really no excuse other than, not really paying attention to what some of these risks are for an organization. So now that we've talked sort of about the issues, and we've talked about some of the challenges, I hope we've given you a couple of tips and ideas or themes to consider as you're going on your data protection journey. And I keep calling it a journey because there is no destination, right? The final destination is, I guess, when you close your business, but even then you may still have some data that's retained. So there is no real destination. It's more a journey to ensure that you're continuously adapting, continuously reviewing, and ensuring that the information and personal data, individuals' lives who you may be affecting by having their data, is being handled in a responsible fashion. So now we'll look more at some of the ways that you can have a program that works, right? And when we talk about a data protection compliance program, it's really what we would consider sort of a structured framework that sets out rules, guidelines around how your organization handles personal data. And quite often people think, oh, well, I've got some policies, I've got procedure, and, we've got an IT department, they have some technical controls in place. But a data protection compliance program, especially the holistic kind that TLC promotes, is a lot more comprehensive than just having a policy, procedure, and controls. Even though, again, there's a great starts, it is a journey as you build out your compliance program. You can add in some of these additional areas. And the first one is your data map or your inventory. How can you protect what you don't know you have? We have in many organizations, there's that file room or that filing cabinet or some offsite storage where we've just put data. We've forgotten about it. We may have an IT room where there's old servers, old systems that people may have put data on and we're no longer using, it's no longer supported, but they're still there. Again, that's why we promote data minimization, because the less data you have, it reduces sort of the risks to the organization. Rights management is another key component of a compliance program, because at the heart of all data protection legislations is the desire to protect individuals. And individuals should have rights over how organizations process and use their personal data. And those are things like just rights to know, like, what do you have about me? Is it all correct? Can I rectify any information that may be incorrect? Can I erase or request that my information is deleted? Because there's no real lawful basis, there's no purpose for you to still have my data. So I always sort of recommend, as organizations are prioritizing elements of their compliance program, because rights and individuals is at the heart of our data protection program. You want to ensure you've got procedures in place for handling requests, that you've trained staff, especially frontline staff, customers, customer service reps, receptionists, on how your data protection program works. And then again, having an easy way to be able to give people access to know what types of data you have about them. Training and awareness. Do you want to talk to that, Lennox, about the importance of good training and keeping up ongoing awareness in an organization?
Yeah, sure. So training is so important in all areas. We know that nothing really happens these days without some form of training, and having that training program in place. And again, going back to the word continuous, a continuous training program in place where employees or your team members can continually get updated information on the requirements is so important. Um, Awareness, not just hoarding information in a department or by an individual, but making the entire organization that aware of the compliance requirements. Because again, you might have client-facing staff that are not aware of certain things, and they are the people who are interacting with your clients every single day. So it's very critical that they are made aware of all the requirements that are necessary to remain in compliant um, with the act. And part of that awareness actually comes with training. We have an internal program with our firm where we are aware of all the different threats out there when it comes to cybersecurity. Every week, we are required to do at least 15 to 20 minutes of training, and that might not sound like a lot, but it definitely resonates in your head when you come across a situation that was described in the training. So even a simple program like that, having a 15-minute session every Monday morning to remind staff of different areas or to give tips on requirements is very important, and it works. Trust me, 15 minutes again doesn't sound like a lot, but just watching a video for 15 minutes and then doing a short quiz after, it helps to sink information in, especially when you're getting up in age like myself and I can't remember a lot of things. I'm so amazed that sometimes I get emails and automatically I go back to the training that I would have seen in regards to the type of phishing emails that come my way, and I say, okay, I saw this in training, so I should delete this, or I should make my IT department aware of this. So it really works.
Yeah, for sure. And as Lennox said, it doesn't always have to be long training. It doesn't have to be training that has to be delivered. It could be automated. There are loads of different programs, some free, some paid, online training, little mini or micro courses that again just gives you some of that information. One of the things I do want to highlight is also role-based training, because not all users are the same. So you may have some high risk users. So those are the ones generally management, directors, remote users or mobile users that are out and about, or perhaps even IT and legal teams. Those are what we would call high risk users, because quite often they have a lot of access in an organization. They have a lot of information that their credentials give access to. So thinking about training as well across the organization, but having some sort of high risk user role based one-to-one type of training is also useful as well. Another important part of a compliance program is vendor management. I mean, I think I don't turn on my computer one day and not see a breach that was because of a vendor. And when we talk about vendors, there's a third parties who either have access to data, there's you're sharing data with them. There are loads of different breaches that occur because you have not adequately conducted due diligence against those vendors. And remember, ultimately, under some legislations, it's the responsibility of the organization, such as Bermuda's Piper. In others, the EU GDPR, the UK DPA, it's a joint responsibility. So it's the controller or the originating organization. And then it's also the processor, so that one who's getting data from that organization. They may have joint responsibilities around compliance. So again, it's important to have good oversight and insight into your vendors as much as reasonably appropriate, depending on the type of data that they're using, sharing, or processing on your behalf. Monitoring and auditing.
Actually, here
Sorry,
to
go ahead.
in
Mhm.
regards to vendor management as well, I think it is very critical because even for us as accountants, when we are performing services for our vendors, for our clients, and they are audited clients, sometimes the auditors, or in most cases, the auditors actually reach out to us to find what internal controls we have in place that is protecting our clients' data. So ticking that box in regards to clients, IT service providers as well, especially IT service providers, because that is probably one of the most popular ways people get data is through technology. It is very important to ensure your IT service providers have adequate programs in place to protect the data that they're seeing when they're performing their services for your company. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And then if you want to just keep going, Lennox, if you can talk to how the importance, we talked about sort of the continuous ongoing assessments, but what about monitoring and auditing when it comes to particularly the auditing piece with compliance programs?
So in terms of the continuous auditing, so as part of a lot of audit programs, they have something what's called continuous auditing. So they're not just auditing at a point in time; they're continuously auditing the data that is passing through your systems. So that is pretty critical because it helps you to be able to identify and correct errors in a more timely basis than just auditing after the fact. A lot of times when you just audit after the fact, you might pick up the error or the omission or fraud, whatever it is. But there's nothing you can do about it at that point in time to recover, have a significant recovery from it. But when you have this continuous auditing in place, then you can actually prevent. It's actually more of a preventive control, if I can compare it to a detective control. So a preventive control prevents further damage or prevents further error from happening. A detective control it detects it after the fact. So it helps because you detect that there's something wrong, but it's already gone wrong. With a preventive control, you're actually preventing it from happening. So that continuous auditing is very critical.
Yeah, and I guess it's good for organizations to have a mix of those, right?
Yes, it
To
is.
just, prevent and then you just forget about it, or just, okay, well, we'll just detect. It's good to have a mix of those controls for a compliance program. And then I guess I remember when I first started working on a help desk, one of my earliest jobs back in the mid 90s, or sorry, late 90s actually. Um, my first supervisor gave me a sticky note, had CYA on it, and stuck it on my monitor. These are one of those old-fashioned monitors right back in the 90s. And I was like, boy, what is this? What? She elaborated what the CYA, cover your blank for this. She says, when you are working on a help desk, document, 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 because at the end of the day, it will be your word against theirs if you do not have documentation. Can you talk to Lennox how important that would be with a compliance program, right? The importance of documenting and record keeping, because it's all well and good to say, oh, well, we've got all these great things, right? Where they can talk it up. But how do you evidence? Can you just maybe talk about that a little bit?
Of
With
course.
a
Yep.
compliance program?
Sure. So first, documenting actually makes it easier for people to come behind you and see what's going on or see what happened, rather than it all being in someone's head. And then the other thing with documentation is that in case of legal issues down the road, you have documentation to prove exactly your viewpoint of what would have occurred. And that can either make or break you in a civil court or a legal court, for that matter. So it's so important in everything we do now. Documentation would never go away, whether it's in electronic format or is in paper format. You have to be able to refer back to some sort of documentation to help you understand what occurred. And in terms of policies and procedures, obviously documentation of policies and procedures makes it easier for people to follow those policies and procedures as well, rather than having to rely on someone to show them and then you remember. Having those things documented is a great way to have a transition of knowledge.
Yeah, and I think the key thing as well is not just document the outcome, because
Yeah.
sometimes we go into organizations and they've got policies, procedures, they've got their playbooks and all this great stuff. And then you identify a risk and they're like, well, we thought we handled it. Document your decision-making process as well.
Hmm.
Document why you chose this particular control, why you've chosen this particular stance, to maybe accept a risk, right? Don't just document the outcome. Don't just have the little pretty binder or the little document, electronic document of your program. Have all the nitty-gritty, have all of the decisions and who was involved, especially with organizations where there's maybe high turnover, or there's a lot of different external vendors who may be providing inputs. Who was involved? Who made those decisions? So that if there is an issue, you can always go back to them in case this is why we actually took this particular position for our compliance program.
Right.
All right. So next, we want you all to build effective compliance programs, right? So we already talked about, some of the standard things you would find in a program, policies, procedures, controls, getting some rights management, knowing what data you're protecting, things like that, vendor management. We want you to build effective compliance programs that make sense for your organization, compliance programs that are fit for purpose, as well as do not create unnecessary or undue burden. So quite often, especially with smaller organizations, they're like, well, we just don't have the resources. We can't figure out how to do this. There are some sort of hacks and tricks that you can do no matter what size the organization is, what legislations you have to adhere to. There are a couple of things that we will just talk to now about how you can build that effectiveness in. And the first one is planning, right, Lennox? You got to plan.
It is. You had a plan or you plan to fail. I think that's
Yes,
the
for
same.
sure.
Planning is in anything we do. We know planning is so important because it helps you to identify, you know, hurdles that you're going to come up against, and it helps you to have effective ways to get over those hurdles. And going back as well, you guys are probably tired hearing me talk about audit, but this is the thing I can really relate it to is, you know, planning for an audit. You just don't one day get up and say, okay, here I'm ready for the audit. Come in and take a look at my book. You have to plan. You have to create lead sheets.
Mhm.
You have to meet with the auditors in that initial planning meeting, they call it, to talk about the high risk areas, to talk about materiality, and talk about the procedures that they're going to be implemented, the key staff that they're going to want to speak to through the audit. So just relating that back to building a program, compliance program, in planning, you're identifying all those things. You're identifying the key people who are going to be involved in building this program. Where is the knowledge coming from? If you need to get external support, that's part of planning. If you recognize, okay, my internal knowledge is not enough to build an effective program, I need to go out there and get effective uh, outsourced knowledge. And planning for that, having a budget for that. Budget is part of planning. Having a budget for that is very important. So don't forget planning. As I said, failing to plan is planning to fail.
Yes, for sure. And as some organizations are probably finalizing their budgets for 2024, or some of you may be in the sort of first quarter getting your budgets in position. Remember, whatever budget you have, there is something you can do. Don't think, oh, well, I don't have 10,000, 20,000, 100,000, depending on the size of the organization and its needs. There is a way that you can start. I just want to just do a shout out to local supervisory authorities. So Bermuda has its privacy commissioner's office. UK has the information commissioner's office. Jamaica, all of the jurisdictions which put forth a legislation, they always have a supervisory authority, and that supervisory authority or commissioner's office is helpful. So you can make sure you lean on the resources, because again, a lot of those would be free or minimal cost for organizations to participate, get information, get templates, get guidance. So if you do have an issue with budget, I would just highly recommend making friends with the supervisory authority in the jurisdiction that you're in. Also with compliance, effective compliance program, communication and collaboration. I say the two C's there is vitally important. Of course, you want to get management and all of that good stuff, leadership on board. But the communication, I'm sure, Atlantic, you've worked in organizations where a decision was made from on high that's come down and it's affected how you do your work. It's affected the morale of the organization, right? Communication is very important because you want to be able to communicate the importance for the organization to be compliant with the data privacy and security legislations that it needs to be regulated by. But you also want to be able to have that two-way communication. You want to have ways that an employee could share concerns. So some organizations have whistleblower protection,
Mhm.
where it's in their their board, or I'm sorry, not the board, in their code of ethics, where if an individual suspects an issue, or they have real evidence that there is an issue, they can let the organization or the designated representative know, and there wouldn't be a negative or blowback to them. So having whistleblower protections, having anonymous ways that people can submit concerns, because again, sometimes people don't feel, they may feel like they're if we use the layman's term, snitching, right?
Yeah.
So is doing this and that in the office. It's not necessarily always, you do want to know, perhaps, depending on the risk, who did it. But I think equally as important is giving a free two-way communication for people to feel confident that they can report these things in to the office or to the privacy representative to ensure that those things are reduced or mitigated. There's risks that are being reported. So communication as well as collaboration. It's not just a privacy officer's job. It's not just an administrator or an operations manager's job to ensure that data is being protected. It's everyone. So organizations that develop a culture that put sort of privacy and security at the heart of their operations will often have a more effective compliance program because people feel bought in, they feel part of it, they feel like they can raise issues or raise suggestions, right, Lennox, when it comes to giving input into what the compliance program is, how it's operating in a day-to-day focus.
Yeah, and I would recommend going forward for teams which have like operational meetings on whether a weekly, monthly basis. Compliance should be now on the agenda for those operational meetings. It shouldn't just be the status quo in terms of financial other stuff. Compliance to the privacy laws should be one of not under AOB either. It should be one of the agenda items because it is that important, is that critical now to our business going forward that you need to make that one of the main things you discuss in operational meetings.
Next, we want to look at, so we've given you some tips around having an effective compliance program. Again, that's planning, making sure you've got management and executive leadership, putting in place some communication, collaboration. And we mentioned earlier, continuous improvement, making sure that you're, continuously assessing how the program is functioning. A couple of tips here around developing and implementing a compliance program. No two organizations are the same. So your implementation may not look the same as another, even if you're in the same sector, you're a similar size, because it's people at the end of the day. It's the culture in an organization that can greatly impact how it is actually received by the staff. So implementing a compliance program, one of the key things I think is looking at it as a project, right? It's not just something that is that it will just happen, right? You want to be able to make sure you're putting milestones in place. And I think, do you want to just talk a little bit more about some of those key project things, Lennox? Because I know in your environment, you may, projects is sort of your bread and butter when it comes to operations. Some of those key things that people want to think about when managing a project.
So when managing projects, one of the key things is timelines. Always have a timeline in mind and document it again, so that people are aware of when different deadlines need to be met. It's also about having that leader, that person, not necessarily the person that's going to do everything, but having that coordinator that is going to keep everything intact. So that coordinator is a person that connects all of the different pieces of the project, so all the different players, keeps them in check. As I said, it's not necessarily the person that's going to be doing everything, but just the person that's going to be directing and ensuring everything keeps according to the project plan. Again, very important when managing projects as well is the communication piece. Have the channels for communication of the project for when things go wrong or when things go right. Actually, you should be communicating that as well. And always have room in place for unexpected occurrences. So in any project you do, whether it is the timeline or the project budget you're talking about, you always have some room or some fat, as I call it, for unexpected occurrences that you can handle it without any fear of the project failing. Because we all know things necessarily don't go according to plan always. So it's always good to have in that plan some sort of contingency to take care of situations like that.
Yeah. And so the other key piece I would just add there, in addition to having a project, getting, a project owner or process owner in place, is also you may need additional support. And again, as I said, there is quite often your commissioner's office or your supervisory authority may have some support. There are a lot of online groups and forums around data protection compliance, which you can, join and get some useful information, practical information. And then there's consultants or companies such as TLC, which provide this external advice and guidance. So it may be that as you're developing your program, you may see that you have gaps. Don't let it stop you. There are, again, at various price points, various levels of support, different ways that an external advisor can ensure that your compliance program is implemented successfully. Now we're going to talk about some of the things that will be on our roadmap to success. And one of those is looking at some strategies for effective compliance management. I know we've got, I think this session, we've got quite a bit of things we've talked about so far, Alex. I just realized we've got 10 minutes left. So we will just highlight a couple of the most effective ones I found personally anyway, when it comes to compliance management. And you may have heard me sort of touch on it earlier, and it's about the culture. As I said, there's some cultures which, if you come in with a compliance program that requires a lot of technology, but they're very much paper-based, that may be a hindrance, right? If you've got a culture which is very much decision making is all done from the top, and you've created a program that requires people, on the lower areas of the organization to make decisions, then that may be something new that people aren't used to. So again, thinking about your culture, developing a culture, start from where you are. You may look at other organizations and think, oh, wow, they're so much farther ahead, or wow, these best practices, I don't think we can ever get there. Look at how you can implement it into your culture, into your day-to-day operations, so that it doesn't seem like a burden. It just becomes part of doing business. And I always sort of think about it when seatbelts first became mandatory, right? I knew when I was younger, we used to have 6, 7 people in the back seat, sitting on laps, people in the trunk of the car, just, it was madness. But then because of road safety issues, seatbelts became mandatory. There were limits onto, how many people was safe to travel in a car. And over time, right, Lennox, it became, I don't get in a car without going to, even if I'm in the back, it's just
That's
a
right.
quote, right? To pull over your seatbelt. That is what a really good, effective, holistic data protection and security program looks like. It is just it's just part of working. So again, the culture piece, I just wanted to highlight is one of the main strategies that you can look at to be able to develop your compliance management and ongoing monitoring program. Lennox, did you want to just touch again, and you started to speak about it earlier, about that integration of business operations. So again, I'm saying build your culture so that it can be embedded. Do you want to just maybe elaborate a bit, Lennox, on how that can be done?
Yeah, so in regards to incorporating it or integrating it, I would say into the operations. So, for example, for your privacy program, yeah, you do want to have a separate policy or procedure in place, but then you want to go and look back at all the other policies and procedures for your other areas of operation. And within that, then you want to put in the privacy requirements or the privacy policies and procedures into those procedures, that it doesn't seem like okay, I have to follow this procedure, let's say for reporting finance, and then I have to then go and refer to the privacy procedure or policy separately. As I am doing my financial reporting for the company, I want to be seeing all the things I have to consider when it comes to privacy and adherence to compliance to the Privacy Act and all that. I want to see that all into my financial reporting procedure rather than just having a separate procedure. As I said, having a separate procedure or policy, having a separate policy is great, yes, and it will be needed for, I would say, most organizations. But that should also be dissected as well and put into every single policy you have, operational policy that you have, should having something to do with adherence, compliance, or adherence to the Privacy Act. Something should be in those operational procedures, and that helps the the team to really incorporate it into their day-to-day operation as well, so that at the end of the day, they're following the internal operational procedures manual. At the end of the day, they don't have to then go and check to see, okay, have I done everything in accordance to the privacy procedure or policy? They should already be confident that because I'm following this, let's say, financial reporting procedure that has in all these steps that will cover me in terms of compliance to privacy, I'm done. Everything is done and effective. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, that is the golden land, right? When I talk about a destination, as I said, it's an ongoing journey. But the promised land is being able to have a culture and operational vision for your data protection and privacy program, can really help ensure that you are adequately handling personal data and also making it part of everyday business. And in the next few minutes we've got left, just quickly touching on technology for compliance. I mentioned earlier data mapping and inventory. Technology is a great way to do that. Because when we think about all the volumes of personal data that are hidden in people's emails, hidden in file folders here, there, and everywhere, having data mapping technology tools or automation tools is a great way to not just identify that data initially. It is also helpful because you'll be able to have it continuously monitoring. So as new personal data is introduced, as changes as how people access the data is introduced, the technology will be able to pick that up. Also, when it comes to incident management, when we talk about the risks, there are incidents or breaches that may happen. Having technology to help you with that, to guide you on that process, is very important, because trying to do it based on manual processes can quite often be counterproductive and can also sort of increase the risk of that breach in the organization. And then finally, when it comes to security, there are many different cybersecurity data protection tools that can help protect your data, with encryption when you're sending email, secure email messaging, when you're making sure that people only have access to the information that they need to do their job. Technology is a really big help in this particular area. Did you have anything to add on that one, Lennox?
Items like dual authentication, that is big these days in terms of eliminating the risk of people other than yourself accessing data that you have access to. Simple things like that, just use technology. That is technology, just use it to make your life easier. Automatic archiving the information that you don't no longer need to have. I'm sure there are tools that can, rather than you having to remember to having to move data from one location to the next, that can automatically archive that information and restrict the access to that information. Technology, some people might say fortunately, some might say unfortunately, has become a huge part of any business operation these days, and just using it to leverage the operation is just makes sense. Is any business these days that is operating with technology, I don't know of any, but if there is any, I would tip my hat to them. But technology, just use it. And there are a lot of things that are coming aboard that people feel they think that is a risk when it comes to technology, but I think the greater risk is not using technology effectively. Not using technology, it's just not using it effectively.
Yeah, for sure. And again, as with any new introduction of anything into your organization, ensure that you're doing an adequate risk assessment. around any technology tools that you're considering, even for your data privacy and security compliance program. And then just finally, a few tips for avoiding common mistakes. We talked about planning. Just if you just look at it as a, well, we'll just do this as we go along, or, just do it as an ad hoc. Okay, I've got a policy. Okay, I'll throw that up on a website, my notice. I'll do a little bit of training here and there. Not having the adequate planning. Um, that is one of the number one, I would say, contributors to unsuccessful programs. Is there was no plan, there was no journey, vision built out to ensure that the organization is on the right track. Under resourcement and investment, I'll let you talk to that in a moment, Lennox, but I just want to just quickly mention the other ones. Lack of training and also not customizing. As I said, there is no sort of cookie cutter program that works across all organizations. There are lots of templates and best practices. Make sure that you're customizing it to your particular organization's needs. So finally, Lennox, I'll hand it over to you to just talk about the under-resourcing or under-investment mistakes that some organizations are making.
So what I'm going to say in regards to this is sometimes that you look at the upfront costs and it might cause you to say, no, I don't want to spend all that money upfront. But just look at the possibility of things going wrong and then you're liable for a fine or something. Usually that cost that you have to spend on the line is way greater than that initial investment that you have to make to ensure that you're compliant and that you have an adequate program in place. So don't just look at that upfront cost, which many people do when you're assessing, when you're budgeting for implementation of program. Determine, okay, what if this happens? What would be the impact to the organization be on a financial level? Have the adequate resources in place as well. When I say resources, I'm talking about things like insurance to cover yourself in case of things going wrong as well. Yeah, we all don't like insurance because a lot of times we pay into insurance and you don't use it. But it's one of those things that once you invest in it, you're actually passing that risk on to a third party. So it's very important that we invest in insurance to protect ourselves. Yep.
Yeah. That's great. And again, as a TLC and other companies will often have solutions at different levels. So looking at your budget, you can approach a company like Abacus and Lennox's team. They can help you work out what that budget would look like. How do you not break even, but how do you create an opportunity to pass on perhaps some of those costs, or to look at other areas where you can reduce budget so that you have an adequate investment in your data protection program. So thanks for that. So yes, we have reached the end of our Cracking the Compliance Code webinar today. We hope that it's been helpful. We hope that if you've joined us for the first time, that you found it's been of value, and that as we continue on, hopefully in the new year with these, that you'll send along your suggestions, things that you want to have a better understanding about, especially if this is new to your organization. Lennox, did you have any final words before we finish for today?
My final words is something I've repeated many times: plan, plan, plan. Get those plans in place. If you haven't started, it's never too late to start. Yeah, you're a little behind, but just get that plan in place, get that compliance program going, and enjoy the holidays.
Yes, yes. We've got most people 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks left before a lot of companies will be on their break. So we wish everyone a safe and happy holiday. Make sure you check out our YouTube and our, I think on our Facebook and our website. You can check out the live stream we did last year, which is the 25 tips, because a lot of them are still applicable. There's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of scammers that are out there. today. So we do encourage you to make sure that you check that out. And be safe, be digital safe, and enjoy your holidays. Thanks to everyone. Thank you for your comments and kind words. And we look forward to seeing you again in the new year. Take care. Bye bye.